One day, Tom's family, Tom, his wife Julia, and their two children Cassie and Ben, go sailing on the Caribbean Sea in a pleasure craft. Tom and Ben are busy fishing. Cassie is absorbed in her phone while Julia goes for a swim. While swimming, Julia senses that something is strange even though the sea looks calm. She feels a creeping fear, as if something large and dangerous is nearby. At the same time, the instruments on the boat begin to malfunction, but Tom, preoccupied with fishing, doesn't notice. Julia grows more frightened and suddenly starts to sink. She shouts for help, but her family doesn't hear her. The water seems to pull her away from the boat. At last, Tom hears her voice and rushes to help.
Sid, come in, I need you.
What?
Mom needs help.
Wait. I got you, don't worry.
With the children's help, Tom manages to pull Julia back onto the boat and save her. Tom is upset because Julia didn't tell him before going in, as he always asks. Julia apologizes, and they move on with celebrating Ben's 13th birthday. They light candles on the cake, and everyone congratulates Ben. Cassie even snaps a photo of their happy family. Suddenly, a fierce storm rolls in. Cassie is worried because her boyfriend calls to warn that there's a storm over land, but the connection cuts out. Then they all feel a jolt and hurry to the deck. There, they see a huge whale surface and shove their boat. Tom explains that whales can get disoriented during a storm. He dives to check the damage and injures himself on the propeller. Julia tends to the wound, and Tom tells her the boat may be badly damaged by the whale's tail. They can't go anywhere. Cassie tries to check for a signal to communicate, but there's none. Tom calculates that they have only enough water for 4 days. They hope another vessel will find them, but that night they watch glowing objects fall from the sky. They turn out to be man-made satellites. Tom tries to move the boat to avoid the falling debris, but the engine is broken, the wind howls, and the onboard instruments make strange sounds. That night the family is terrified. They put on life jackets and brace for anything. Tom fires a flare to call for help, but no one comes. All they can do is endure the long night with a heavy sense of dread. The next morning, they're relieved to be alive, but shocked to discover a massive hole in the side of their yacht. Oddly, the boat is still upright even though the seawater has vanished. They step outside and are astonished to see that their vessel now rests on rock outcrops in the middle of a desert where the sea used to be. Tom tries to calm his family and says that maybe not everyone has disappeared. He takes measurements and finds the compass no longer points true. It means Earth's pole has shifted. Events like this happened ages ago, but now the ocean has receded, and land once underwater has re-emerged. Tom suspects many people may have perished in this catastrophe. Cassie is stunned by this and runs to the cabin, asking to be left alone. Meanwhile, Julia checks their remaining food and water, and Ben releases colorful balloons into the sky in hopes someone will see them and help. Tom then powers up the radio and sends a distress signal. Suddenly, they get a reply from Now, the captain of a small submarine. Captain Now explains they survived because they were far below the surface when the disaster struck. However, most communications are down, and the chance of real assistance is very small. Captain Now estimates the sea will return within a week, and when it does, it will be extremely dangerous. He advises Tom's family to get to higher ground as soon as possible. Tom asks if the captain can rescue the children. Now explains his sub is very small, and he can take only one person. After some conversation, Tom convinces him to take both children. Captain Now gives coordinates for a rendezvous point. Tom studies the map and promises to bring his family there in a few days. The next morning, the family is almost ready to start their trek. Tom steps onto the deck and suddenly sees a man with a dog approaching. Tom tries to greet the man, but realizes the stranger is injured. Tom offers him water, and the man drinks. Then, without warning, the man smashes Tom in the face and stabs his chest with an emergency spear. The man's dog keeps Julia at bay so she can't reach her husband. Julia is terrified and realizes no one can save Tom now. She sprints back to the yacht, but the man chases her and slashes her arm. Julia scrambles up to the deck, and the children, hearing her cries, rush to help. Together, they barricade the cabin door. Julia hides Cassie and Ben inside a locker and hands Cassie the flare gun, telling her to shoot only if absolutely necessary. Meanwhile, the intruder tries to break down the door, He finally forces his way in. Julia hides in the aft bathroom to tend her wound. The man heads straight to the galley and starts eating, clearly starving. Julia arms herself with a kitchen knife. He enters the cabin, but Julia jumps down and hides beneath the hull. The man's dog finds her and attacks, forcing Julia to kill the animal. The man hears the commotion and finds the dog's body. Julia climbs back aboard through a hole in the opposite side of the yacht, only to be seized by the intruder. He strikes Julia and strangles her. Cassie, seeing everything, knows this is the moment to act. She slips out of the locker and fires the flare gun, blasting the attacker backward. But the shot also ignites the yacht. Julia orders the children to run while the wounded man lunges again. Julia kicks him away, grabs his blade. Ben finds his father Tom's body and weeps beside him. Julia kisses Tom goodbye one last time. Then they see the intruder jump from the burning yacht. Julia leads the children away as their boat explodes behind them. They run across the rocky desert and finally find shelter in a canyon. They discover a stream, but the water is salty and undrinkable. Cassie shares a little water with Ben, but Ben feels guilty. He thinks the intruder came because he saw the balloons Ben released. Cassie feels guilty too, but Julia tells them to stop blaming themselves. She defends her son and says Ben never meant to cause harm. They resume their journey, but Julia spots the intruder again, still pursuing them. Ben finds the carcass of a hammerhead and tries to cut some meat to eat. Julia sees the attacker nearby and orders the children to run. They reach a field strewn with toxic waste drums, but Julia urges them to keep moving despite the danger. The family trudges on across the former seabed, now choked with plastic debris. Ben grows dangerously dehydrated, and Julia gives him their last water. Cassie begins to lose hope, and they all feel survival slipping away. But Julia insists they keep going. At last, they find the wreck of an old aircraft that once fell into the sea. Julia looks at the last photo of their family and tells the story of the first time she met Tom at the hospital, when Tom was brought in after a diving problem. The children cry, remembering their father and saying a final goodbye to Tom. That night, Cassie is awakened by a noise. She steps outside the fuselage and sits nearby. The intruder suddenly emerges from the darkness. Unaware Cassie is only acting as bait. As he approaches, Julia bursts forth and attacks, stabbing him with the knife. At dawn, they prepare to move on but are shocked to find the man's body gone. It's a sign there is another threat, something larger than any human, stalking the wasteland. As they press forward, Julia checks the map. Suddenly, Ben sprints ahead. Julia shouts for him to stop, but Ben keeps running to a pool of brackish water and drinks a little. Julia yanks him back, but soon Ben falls ill from the water. They find several plastic chairs and rig a shelter from the sun. While Ben rests in the shade, Julia hears unsettling sounds. She steps out to investigate and realizes a new danger is bearing down on them. She rouses the children at once and they start to run. In the distance, they spot a large ship surrounded by toppled containers. A few people are moving near the hull. Julia calls out for help, but the people, terrified, bolt into one of the containers and lock the door behind them, paying no heed to her pleas. Then Julia, Cassie, and Ben see thousands of giant crabs swarming toward the container where those people have taken refuge. Julia, Cassie, and Ben scramble onto the top of a container to avoid the crabs. Even so, the massive creatures gash Julia's leg as they climb. Perched above, the family watches in horror as the crabs pry through the door's gaps and attack the people inside despite their resistance. Julia ties a scarf around her wounded leg, then faints from exhaustion. At daybreak, Julia wakes alone and frightened. She calls for her children, but the giant crabs are gone, and Cassie and Ben have climbed down to scavenge for food and weapons. Julia cauterizes her wound to stop the bleeding while Ben finds some armaments. They search through the containers and uncover a little food and water. Julia also finds a radio in the pocket of one of the deceased. Julia tries to reach Captain Now, and finally he answers. He tells her he, too, has been attacked by a massive sea creature. He explains the ocean is about to return. That's why these creatures are on the move. Julia begs Now to rescue her children, but she is disoriented after losing the map. Captain Now then fires a flare to mark his location, and Ben spots the direction. They hurry toward it. Through the haze, they glimpse a yellow submarine. but it's extremely difficult to reach across the rough terrain of the exposed seabed. Cassie is heartsick overhearing her mother's talk of saving them, but Julia says nothing and keeps urging them onward. They must cross a ravine contaminated by toxic waste. At one point, a rock slide separates Julia from the children. She orders Cassie and Ben to keep going, and although Cassie protests, Julia begs her to save her younger brother. Cassie and Ben emerge from the ravine and reach the sub, but find no one inside. Suddenly, a badly wounded Captain Now appears from behind the hull. He says he has no hope of surviving and orders them to get into the submarine. Cassie wants to go back for her mother, who is fighting off a giant crab and nearly out of ammunition. Julia scrambles over rocks as Cassie extends a hand. And together, they make it to the submarine just as the crabs surge over the vessel. The family clambers inside at the very moment the sea returns and begins to lift the sub. Powerful currents drag the craft across jagged stone. Julia watches the events of the past days flash before her eyes, then blacks out. When she wakes, she discovers the submarine has come to a stop. Julia works the hatch, and the family steps outside. They find themselves in a ruined city, carried there by the returning tide. The silence is haunting, but they're together and alive. As the sun rises over the wreckage, they know the storm is over, but the world has changed. And with that, the film ends.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe, because by subscribing you have supported me to make better videos. See you in the next video.